welcome back to Just Code It. Today we're going to be going over a little app that allows you to chat with a website. If you look to the right, this is the completed app where we can select the Ollama model, embedding model, either use full text search or full context or vector embeddings, chunk size, and then overlap. You input your URL, hit process. It says it's using the vector embeddings based off of the size. And you can ask it, might take a second, but there it is. What is Langchain? Now that we've taken a look at the completed app, let's get going on coding it. So like always, do the Streamlit run app in the terminal to get the app launched. And then we're just going to set up the page config. The page config consists of set page config, page title, icon, layout. We're going to use wide, and then we're going to do st title, which is going to give us the title. After the page config, we're going to set up some of those state variables. When we call this, it will set the message and the chat to none. So clear it out. If it is not already set, we're checking the state. And then if it's not set, we're going to set it to empty lists. After initializing the state, we're going to actually come down to the very bottom to the main function and initialize the state and initialize the page config. Doesn't matter which order you do those in. While we're down here, we're also going to initialize the sidebar. And we will also create the URL input where you input the URL for it to be processed. And then we're going to have that process button. If there's a URL, we're going to store it in the state variable for URL. Process query will then process query using this method that we haven't created yet. If the query is not none, so if we actually process the query, we then go through and we check these, we set these state variables. We'll come back to these later when it makes a bit more sense. And then we're going to display the chat message and then handle user input. That will start populating the UI once we start filling out some of these methods. Back up to the top, we are going to start with this sidebar. So the way we're doing the sidebar is a bit different than you might ordinarily see, but we're basically creating an object. So we're creating this dictionary with all the names of the variables that we're going to be setting. And then within that object, we're creating the boxes. So we're creating a select box within that where you select the different models. And what this does at the end of it is you just get a single object that you can use for your whole config throughout your file. So you can set it as your state variable and pass it around your file a lot easier than constantly remembering which variables are assigned to what and assigning a bunch of variables in general. This is a way I learned a little while back, and I've really enjoyed it because it keeps everything together. We're assigning the embedding model, the text threshold, the chunk size, and then the chunk overlap. We're setting our min, max, the value, and then the step. Returning the config file. Once we come down here, we're going to create the sidebar and set it to the config out here. And now we can use that config throughout here and just pass it to our different methods. After setting up the sidebar, we're now going to work on processing the website. Come down here, we can just add in the try catch or try except for loading the website loader and then loading in the data. From the data, we grab the first list element and then we grab the page content and return it. If it errors, we're going to return the error and return none or show a Streamlit. If the exception is thrown, we're going to then show the error on the Streamlit application and return none. After extracting the web page, we're going to create the full context processor and the create vector database processor. How we're doing this is because we're using both full context and vector database, we need to then pass a function back from these to allow the chat interface to call it and get the response. Within these functions, we're constructing that processor. These processors will be constructed in slightly different ways, but they're basically going to have the same approach. The processor is going to be the process query method, within each of these, and then we're going to pass it our prompt. And for just the full context, we're just going to be passing it the full web page context instead of a response from a similarity search. And finally, we return the process query method. When we call this, it will then return the process query method that will be standardized. Our other vector database processor is also going to have a process query method within it. But the difference here is we're going to do a similarity search and get those responses. We're passing in the question, chat history, we're going to get the response. From that response, we're going to get the answer. Finally, we're returning that response text. Outside of the process query method, we then return the process query method to keep it standardized. Next, we have the setting up of the vector query approach. This is going to be setting up that vector database. So we're going to do the recursive character splitting, grab our config and get our chunk size and our overlap. We're going to compute our chunks by splitting our text. After computing those chunks, we're going to create that embeddings model. So this embeddings is going to do the embedding for us and create a vector store, which is fast. I can never pronounce that, from text. Pass it our chunks and our embedding model. After creating our vector store, we're going to create a retriever. So it allows us to query and do similarity search. Here, we're going to do vector store as retriever. Search query parameters, we're going to do k equals 4. So this is going to return the 4 most likely documents or contexts. But if we wanted to give it a bit more context, we could do it k equals 5, and now it'll return the 5 most similar. We're going to set up the memory. This is that chat history. We're going to use it as our memory. So when you chat, it won't be a single chat message and then it will forget everything. You can have a conversation with it. Create our LLM, which is going to be chat Olama, and then use that config again to grab the Olama model. Finally, to create our Langchain, we're going to do conversation retrieval chain from LLM, pass it our LLM, our retriever, and our memory. This creates that conversation retriever chain, or the Langchain. If Langchain expression language, this could be represented in LLM, pipe, retriever, pipe, memory. Finally, we just return that QA chain. What this method does is extracts the text from the website and sets up the query processors that we completed previously. So this will be a spinner to let people know that the app is thinking. We're going to then call our extract text from web page, pass it the URL if text is not none. So we're checking to see if it erred, turn none 0. Here we're grabbing the length of the text response, and we're going to use this later on to check to see which type of method we're going to use, full text or full context or vector embeddings. And that's actually what we do right down here. We're going to use that config threshold and then either go full context or vector embedding. Finally, we're returning the processor that we create during these two methods and the text length. The last section we have is creating the UI a bit more. So we're going to start this with the display chat message. Here we're going to iterate over the session states messages, and for each type, so where there's a role and a content, we're going to print them. The first UI component we're going to complete is the display chat message. Here we're going to iterate over the session states messages, and then with chat message, which is a Streamlit component, we're going to use the message.role, and then we're going to also write the message, the st.write message content to the screen as well. The last method we have is handle user input. This will not be shown until the website is processed, but here it is. At the top, we have the st chat input, which is just the chat input box with what we like the ghost text over it, or placeholder. If user input, so if user has input, we're going to then do st session state message, and then we're going to append the message with the role. The role is going to be user, and then the content is going to be the user input. We're going to display the message to the screen, generate the response with chat message assistant, and then within there, we're going to do a with spinner to show that it's thinking, call our query processor, and then we're going to write that response to the screen. Finally, we're going to append that response to the message state. So it's going to be role assistant and then content response text. That should be it, I believe, for the app. But if we come down here, we have if process, it's going to call the processor, set these state variables. Yep, it all looks good. Let's see if it works. We can select our different model, different embedding model, change the text. Let's run that many characters. We're going to use vector embeddings. See if we can get it into full text search. Yep, it's going to do full text. What is Langchain? If we change anything on the left-hand side, we need to reprocess. Okay, now we're using vector embeddings. It's thinking. Yep, it looks like it's all looking good. If you're using a thinking model like I am right now, you can also add these thinking tags to a popover, which could put it inside of a little popover so you can have it slide down or slide up. It keeps it out of the way. I just didn't do that for this tutorial, but I've done it in the past. Up next, we're going to do a web page crawler, but we're probably going to get rid of some of these settings because a crawler is going to definitely have more. You can't do really a full context search for a crawler. So we'll probably get rid of some of that, but add some more useful settings like depth and number of pages to crawl, things like that. Then you'll be able to chat with the whole website. That is it for today. I hope you enjoyed today's video.